Welcome, Jalasi. My name is Marcia Ostashewski, and I'm the director of the Center for Sound Communities at Cape Breton University. The university and I am today, we are in Unama'ki, which is sometimes known as Cape Breton Island, part of the larger lands of Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territories of Mi'kmaq people, where we are learning learning ways to honor the knowledge and the histories of Mi'kmaq people and all of the human and other than human beings that have been here since time immemorial. And today we have a special guest, Dr. Stephanie Conn. She's here as the fifth presenter in a six-part series of lectures, sessions on the human voice. Last week in our class, which was 2 weeks ago because a reading week was last week, so we had a break, was Dr. Alicia Lola Jones. And today is Stephanie Conn, who is an ethnomusicologist. She graduated with her PhD from the University of Toronto. Stephanie researches Gaelic song traditions in Cape Breton, in Unama'ki. She's especially interested in performance practice, in memory, both in terms of individual and community memories, in recording archives from a historical and practical perspective, both. She's an editor of academic and nonfiction materials and was a CBC radio music producer for 14 years. So in our music program here at Cape Breton University, there are interesting connections with music industry. So we are benefiting from her experience in that as well today. As a solo singer with the crossover ensemble Perche de Baroque, Stephanie earned a Juno Award nomination for the CD Return of the Wanderer, distributed through Marquise, or EMI. And Stephanie was here a couple of years ago at the same time that Dr. Alicia Jones was here. If you were part of our session that last time, you heard Dr. Jones speak about a conference that we hosted at the Center for Sound Communities that we all traveled around the island and engaged with local communities. And out in Shetty Camp in the Great Stone Cathedral, we sang a concert, and one of the performers was Stephanie. It was a really lovely musical memory. She's also performed across Canada in concerts and on live broadcasts for NPR, Bravo, and CTV. Stephanie's a choral singer specializing in early music, and she's sung with Tafel Music, La Chapelle de Quebec, Sin Nominé and Aradia, and on Rhombus Media's film of Mark Morris's Dido and Aeneas. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephanie Conn.
Thank you so much, Marcia, for that warm and overly laudatory introduction. I think what you're doing here is so, if we could have mutual admiration, it's such a wonderful project that you're doing here with the sound communities. And it's just a real honor to be part of it and to try to contribute to that dialogue, really. It's really terrific. Also, I'd like to thank the members of the class and you for inviting me to be part of viewing really the same material that I've been working on for years, but through a little bit of a different lens. Like usually I'm talking about, yes, about performance practice, but what it reveals about the place of music in people's lives, but from a slightly different, today I'll be talking about it from a much more embodied way and actually talking about the voice, which is, it feels like an indulgence in a way as a singer to get into details like that. So,
Stephanie.
Yes.
May I also say it's really going to be a pleasure later on, just for folks so that they're aware. Stephanie's talk is going to take about an hour, but she's not just going to be talking. We'll have some discussion time, but before the end of her more formal part of the presentation, she's going to lead us in a song. So, you might want to text your other friends who aren't here yet to make sure they join so that we can all learn a song together. As Stephanie said, this is an important embodied knowledge when it comes to human voice to engage in together. And just as I close my mic again and welcome you, I'll announce the title to your talk, and we'll all give a wave and say thanks to Eric for helping us with the technical aspects.
Yes, absolutely.
Talk. Thank you. And Stephanie, your talk is It's what the language gave birth to, the Gaelic voice in Cape Breton.
Thank you. Yeah, that's going to be a quote that'll come up in the course of the talk. And yes, we were saying how slightly ironic it was to be talking, and I'm sure you have this every week, to be talking practice, like the human voice as such a physical thing, and be doing it in this disembodied fashion through the miracle of Zoom. So although sometimes I find disembodiment, when you take away an image, you are forced to think and hear things more carefully. We don't always need images. So we'll try and make the most of that in every way we can today. So I'm going to start with some impressions, some video and some spoken word impressions before I get into my talk. So let me start with this video. Oh, do I have to? No, I'm good now, right? Yeah. At its best, a milling frolic is a stream of Gaelic songs that burst forth like runaway horses until they become a blur of choruses and whoops and laughter. The milling blanket cloth is rough on the hands as we beat it on the table in time to the music. We inhale bits of flying wool and dust, and so under our seats we stash glasses of water or whiskey. The chatter of the community is all around us, filling in the space between the songs and the silence. Singers lean across the table to shake hands or shout inquiries about a song or the news or each other's families. Everyone shouts encouragement to the soloists too, so cries of "Suicide, lifter," or "Shinna hain," good for you, or "there you go," overlap with the words of the songs. Between the songs, conversations spring up. I turn to my right to comment on a song to someone, and when I turn back to the left, someone different is sitting in the seat. Community members sit in a larger ring around us to listen, some of them joining hands to swing their arms in time to the music, but most often, all of them chattering, even during the singing. Peter sings a song about a drowning. If I you. He knows how to make the best use of his voice as he drives the verses up to their climax and then swoops down again, scooping up the rest of us. So we join together to make the chorus both sweet and fierce. It is songs that we've come for, to hear them come alive in the voices of the other singers, to be moved once more by their melodies and stories. But just as importantly, we've come to be one with each other through the music, and maybe for a few hours, to remake the world in Gaelic. Oops. I'm starting with these impressionistic words, sounds, and images because I want to give you the feeling of how deeply integrated Gaelic singing, especially at the milling frolic, is with a social and cultural context. Of course, Gaelic singing happens in many other places other than this very public one. It's very much alive at home and in smaller groups. But I'd like to come back in a bit to this special kind of song event to look at why the milling frolic is a perfect forum for the human voice, the Gaelic voice, and also to look at its particular sounds and vocal qualities. So what I'll be doing today is I'll do a little bit of a historical review, just for those that aren't familiar with exactly, when I'm talking about Gaelic people, it's people who speak Gaelic, who are they? We'll talk about the milling frolic as a way of voicing Gaelic culture and how its meaning or function has evolved over the years. And also how at a milling frolic, how there's this productive tension between your individuality as a singer and the consensus of the group. And we'll talk about transmission of song and style. How do you actually learn these songs and get that sound that you want, the sound that you're going for when you're singing these songs? And I'll try and stop for questions after each section to give you a chance to qualify things. But there's also time, as Marcia said, for discussion at the end. I also want to clarify that throughout this, when I say Gaelic, I'm talking about Scottish Gaelic, or Gaelic, as they call it more often in Scotland, and as it's called in the language itself, not Irish Gaelic. Although there are some commonalities between, I think, some of these practices. I'm also not really talking about Gaelic singing in Scotland, because very often the sounds you hear are different and their social contexts are a little bit different too. And then at the end, we're going to try a Gaelic song. So the first speakers of Gaelic came to Canada probably at the end of the 18th century. And they came from the Gaeltacht, or Gaelic-speaking region, which is mostly in the northwest of Scotland that I've ringed there, the Highlands and the islands of the Outer Hebrides. And they came, of course, not only to Cape Breton, also to mainland Nova Scotia, especially areas like Pictou County and Antigonish County. They were in the eastern townships of Quebec, and Margaret Bennett has a great book about that. And they were Glengarry, Ontario. These are all like little pockets, Saskatchewan, and not forgetting the Codroy Valley in Newfoundland that Margaret Bennett has also written about. So there were all these different areas, but Cape Breton really is now the last stronghold and probably the last Gaeltacht of Scottish Gaelic outside Scotland. So as you probably heard of the Highland clearances, they were evicted from their land, mostly for large-scale sheep farming, sometimes I believe also for deer hunting properties. And this was an exile, and one that many were very sad about. And we can find evidence of that attitude in lots of songs, including the very famous A Cháile Gruamach, which is one of the masterpieces of Gaelic song from that time, which was composed by John MacLean, who came to Barney's River in Pictou County, although it's not far from Antigonish, is it? That little red barn that you can see from the highway is the Barney's River turnoff. And he was so displeased with his situation. He said, "Who me and touch a shaw, who me and touch a shaw, no." Find it hard to speak that line. I found this place so unnatural that every talent in my head has deserted me. He didn't have a good time in any season. He says, when summer comes, the heat of the sun leaves us weak. When winter comes in December, well, I think he was pretty lucky it didn't come till then that year, the snow closes into the top of the branches. But he also, there's little glimmers of good things. He mentions his clumsy moccasin tied with gut. So evidently he was getting help from his Indigenous neighbors. And that's a kind of story that you actually hear a lot from the Gaelic settler stories. And I've heard them from my friends around Christmas Island too, about the relationship they had with the communities in Eskasoni and around there. So some Gaels really were welcoming this chance to start over and to, instead of being tenants, to be landowners in the new country, right? And it's worth noting that I stole this little map from Katrina Parsons. I keep meaning to redo it, but she did such a nice job, I think, of showing how many times communities actually came together. So you see where I am right now, which is on the North Shore, because the ferry was out and I couldn't make it to the Center for Sound Communities. So I'm still here on the North Shore. Let me move over there. And those people, and also down here around, this would be like Catalone and Gabarus, most of them came from Lewis and Harris and have that particular way of singing. I think, anyway, it's maybe a little bit more nasal. They have a little bit of a different style, but they had different dialect and slightly different customs. They were also mostly Protestant. Over here in Inverness County, south here, you see a lot of people from Loch Harbour, people from South Uist, North Uist. They're over here as well around Christmas Island and Barra. So they would have brought with them a lot of those particular as I said, dialects, musical repertoires too. So there's not just really one Cape Breton Gaelic or one Cape Breton singing style, and that's more than we can take on here today. But it's worth noting that there was this multiplicity of flavors. The thing is, though, that in Cape Breton, as in Scotland, it was British rule and the language was English, right? The language of commerce, of government, and most importantly, of education. Communities have had as well, leading this kind of double life. You're bicultural, you speak your own language, speak Gaelic at home, and then have to speak English at school. And it was cruelly enforced, as we have a lot of stories from our friends, unfortunately, as well. And for that reason, we saw this great decline in Gaelic language. And the decline is quite dramatic. There were recorded 200,000 speakers in 1850, and I would guess there'd probably be more than that even, because everybody wouldn't have been, gotten to by the census of the people that were tallying that. 30,000 in 1930, and by then probably people were even denying that they spoke Gaelic, because it was there was quite a social stigma attached to it. But so from 200,000 to 30,000. And in the 2016 census, they report 240 in Nova Scotia. And I'm thinking that's a generous estimate. They must be including people who aren't native speakers or maybe aren't completely fluent. Maybe they're native, but because that seems like a fairly healthy number. Now, as you've probably noticed in the past decade or so, there's been a little more interest and government support for Gaelics. There's a new school just opened in Mabu, and there's more programs, and there's a department now, and they're really trying to invest in that. But the truth is that all the people that you'll see in my videos, the first video was from 1942, so those people are definitely no longer living. But all of my friends that I did research with that are in the videos are no longer living, but they were in their 80s and 90s at the time that I interviewed them. So now you're very lucky if you go to the Highland Village, you'll see a lot of people. You'd be lucky to see someone over 50, I think, working there speaking Gaelic now. So there's definitely a lot of improvement. But the thing, whoops, I have the wrong page there. The thing to remember, I'm making this point because the songs are in Gaelic, right? And they're learned from memory. And you have to have a pretty good understanding of Gaelic in order to do a convincing job singing them, to understand really what's often very deep poetry too. And so much of it. I mean, have you ever tried to learn 16 verses of gibberish? Like, I used to try before I had learned any Gaelic at all, and it's so difficult, and you just don't do a good job of it. You can't do as good a job. You can't do justice to the feeling and the meaning and the cultural keys really that are there. And I think this language requirement for Gaelic is the reason why something like fiddling has done perhaps a little bit better, has flourished a little bit more and become more of a poster child for tourism and music in Cape Breton. And that thing I circled, that's fodder for a whole other conversation, isn't it? It's like music is not only your identity, it literally defines you, they're saying. So that's showing you the importance of music in their lives. But fiddle music, although I would say that you don't have to speak Gaelic to play the fiddle, many would say that the rhythms of the language are in the dance, they're in the fiddle, they're in all of the cultural expressions are interwoven to a certain extent, although they are distinct repertoires for the most part, with some exceptions. At any rate, though, and maybe not surprisingly, the musical practice, or the singing practice and the language have fed each other, because Gaelic singing has become one of the activities, the social contexts, and the private pursuits or hobbies that has helped to keep the language going. It's drawn a lot of new learners. It's provided a bridge between learners or youth and elders or tradition bearers. And so singing has actually been a way to keep Gaelic going. You might say, in a way, then, that an event like the Milling Frolic provides you an opportunity to have a public Gaelic voice, not just something in private. So let's go back to the milling and see what they're really about. So you saw, if you read that article from Cape Breton's magazine with its wonderful photographs, mostly by Ron Kaplan, you'll have read about, how the milling frolic works. They would have spun the wool and woven the cloth, and then the weave was quite loose. So by, how wool shrinks, usually because of careless washing. This was an intentional shrinking of the wool. So they would wet it, and it used to be with urine. There's a lot of joking about that. Mostly it was done with water because that did the job fine as well. And then this was a way of drying it more quickly, by swinging it and beating it on the table, getting all the water out of it, and so shrinking it. And I think in the article, they also describe how they would measure it at certain points because they knew that, it started this big and it had to get to this big to be tight enough. And the singing of songs was a way of, communally working together and passing it and having more fun doing the work. It used to be that it was mostly women's work, and that is, yes, fodder for a whole other talk as well. A lot of the songs are written from a women's point of view, and that is a thing that people are starting to unpack a little bit more. In Cape Breton and in modern times, and that's mentioned in the article as well, men and now you'll see obviously people of all ages and people of all genders there. So it's no longer required is the key, right? In the 1940s, when Sidney Robertson Cowell, the American collector, came to make some recordings of Gaelic songs. I've got all my papers backwards, I realize. Yeah. She talked to some people and asked them about the millings, and they said they already didn't need them. That was the 1940s, because nobody wears homespun anymore. So even then, it was already not needed. But communities still wanted them, and singers still want to show up for them. Gaelic song lives in the home and daily life, though much more, I'd say, than it does in public events like this, because these only occur a couple of times a year. So why focus on this then? Because it's a type of music making that is specific to this culture, and one in which this culture is so evident. So I'd like to show you another little video. This is one I made at a milling frolic in Christmas Island back in 2004. And it's a really fast moving through all the steps of the milling frolic. And I've got some of the things labeled that are going on for you, so you can see some other elements, not just the singing. Sorry. As you were watching there, I'm wondering, I don't know, could I throw the floor open now, Marcia, or should I bother to ask people what they noticed or what struck them about this as a performance? People do buy tickets to come to this. Everyone, the singers don't have to, but everybody else buys tickets. All the people that are sitting around not listening. Sorry, but I give away one of the things there. So, does anyone else want to say anything else that they notice?
And you're just asking people to describe what they're seeing and hearing in the video. Is that correct?
That's right,
Yes.
yeah.
We'll ask the students to offer some observations, please.
Because when you go to this for the first time, you notice these things quite sharply. So Mary has her hand up. Does Eric do that or do I?
Mary, would you like to open your mic? Thanks.
Yeah, and when you mentioned that people buy tickets to attend this, it's certainly not like a typical performance that you would attend. It's not like the performers are put on a stage in front of you when you're watching them. It's more like you're watching a domestic task with some casual singing accompanying it.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly, yeah. Anybody else?
Charlie likes to share in the chat, so I'm going to read.
Ah,
She said she noticed that they wet the cloth.
mm-hmm. Yes, and that was, as I mentioned, that's like in order to shrink the wool, it would have been a woolen piece of wool weaving. So you know how if you ever put, like I said, I once put a favorite sweater in the wash by accident, and now it's tiny for like a childlike size. But so this was actually they used to wet it in order to shrink it. Ah, so maybe you're asking now they don't need to shrink it anymore, but you still wet it because otherwise it's terribly light. And as I mentioned, there's bits of the wool and dust flying up, and you get more swing when it's wet. Hugh, would you like to unmute?
Hi, sorry, I just got here, so I think I missed a few. I got here just for Mary's question, but so I hope this hasn't been asked already. But um, I so the water and everything for the wool, is that correct? Like you would wet kind of
Yeah,
the
they
wool
wet
and
it just
everything?
to give some weight. Now it's just to give some weight to it. It used to be to shrink the wool. Yeah,
Right, yeah. And then it like removes as I understand it, like removes the lanolin and then it allows the wool to like bind together and stuff.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
I'm
No,
saying that because, yeah, that would have been the when it had a use, a practical use. That would have been
right.
the thing. I think that's why they used the urine. I think that maybe removed the lanolin
Oh,
more.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I was just
So
I
it's,
know
I mean,
in oh, go ahead,
yeah,
sorry.
no, I was just, so go ahead, you go ahead.
Oh, the I only know this because I had a teacher who told us about this like clogging tradition in like these I think like mills in England, and then they invented like types of clogging because of the shoes they wore to protect them. So anyway, was there any sort of tradition like that associated with this type of milling?
To do with the shoes?
Yeah, sort of like any like
No, there was
I don't know step
tangential
dancing.
dance, as far as I know. Oh, I've seen pictures in Scotland of them milling with their feet, with their
Oh, okay.
bare feet. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Hannah
So,
also,
Okay. Nice.
oh, sorry.
no, sorry, I was going to round it up.
Yeah, Hannah's okay. The last comment, perhaps from Hannah in the chat, the collective movement of the cloth was mesmerizing with the singing.
Yes, it is. And you know what? I didn't put that in my points that I was going to show you next. This sort of trance or mesmerizing quality. But I mean, all milling frolics have a beat. The beat changes, used to change as the blanket got lighter, but there are different speeds, fast and slow. They all have a really good rhythm, though. Um, I just wanted to sum up some of the things that we mentioned, and that's that, you know, the physical arrangement of a milling frolic performance, and again, yeah, is it a performance, are revealing of the social dynamics and the many things about the Gaelic culture. So as I think it was Mary pointed out, in a formal concert, the flow is one way, right? The performers are standing on a stage or something, and they're like me right now a little bit. I'm trying not to downloading or uploading to the audience, and that's it, right? But in a milling frolic, they all sit in a circle facing each other, and the community enfolds them in another circle. You especially saw that in the first video, which was staged, it's true, but it was a good, really great illustration of the community ring and then the ring inside of the singers. And also there's much movement. You're allowed to get up and move, and there's no pressure, there's no stigma about, if you're tired of singing, you just get up and leave and somebody else comes. If you want to go get a drink at the bar or go back to the tea, the night lunch, you do that and come back and sit and listen again later. So there's much more informality to it. Also, this physicality, there were a lot of questions about the milling cloth itself, but still, like, you're passing it around, you feel the scratchiness, you beat it on the table, you get a splinter on the table, you're getting dry, you have to, this whole, but also you are linked. I always feel like the holding of the blanket is like a physical manifestation of the link that you have as singers during this performance. Also, what you don't see just from one song that you see in these videos is the democratic nature, because there's the role of soloist is shared. I'll sing a song and then the next person will sing a song. And there's a kind of a weird consensus. People ask each other too. So, and you don't start before being asked, and usually an elder member starts or something, but they start it, they have that honor, but they don't keep it, they then pass it. So there's this, no one is ever really in charge of a milling. And that's one of the amazing things that, sometimes maybe 30, so 30 is a generous number these days, but say 20 people show up to sing, and somehow it keeps going for hours and it all works out, So that's, all of this, I think, is a very Gaelic, a very Gaelic way of doing things, and not so autocratic, and not really as organized as some other kinds of performances. And yet, it moves along. It's not like it's unorganized. Maxie McNeil, who was in some of the pictures and videos that I've shown you, he used to say he thought the songs would not have survived if there hadn't been milling frolics. He thought that was the key to the whole thing. And he said, I don't like standing on stage, but I love a milling. So, even if you look at these pictures, again, you can see, people in the background smiling. There's some people kind of lurking, but they're listening. There's this enjoyment of this young girl, this woman sort of blissed out behind her listening. And my friend Peter on the far right of the black and white, he's laughing and having a good time. Yes, Marcia?
Charlie's also saying she loves how this kind of event not only combines communal labor and making it fun through song, but it allows for a community to come together and enjoy each other's company, get caught up on events, get to know each other. She loves the inclusivity. It reminds me of a good old-fashioned kitchen party.
Mm-hmm. That's right, and we saw that in one of those photographs at the beginning too, right? With people just coming in and shaking hands and catching up on the news, and somehow it doesn't feel disrespectful. That it's sometimes difficult, as I'll talk later, physically difficult to sing over the noise, because I think in that video you could even hear how it started quite quiet and the audio level grows during that little video even, because it's a time lapse. But you don't mind. I'd rather have the noise of a bunch of people there having a good time than have it quiet, with very few people listening. So, and to Charlie's point also then, I think it's true that, oh, sorry, I'm not finished with the photos yet. Okay, here are the photos of us at a milling frolic. And there are the same people on stage. Now, I admit I've picked a particularly glum photograph, but this is a legitimate photograph of the same people that were in the other videos having to sing on stage for people at a little bit of a demonstration. And they, they did it, and they actually were proud to do it. And Peter there on the right saying, at the Newport Folk Festival and the Smithsonian Festival in Washington, as did some of the North Shore Gaelic singers. And it's like they were proud to do that. But the difference between that and this is really obvious, right? It's a very different way of presenting yourself and of sharing the music and of experiencing the music. So technically we don't need milling frolics anymore because no one's wearing homespun, but they are not fake or reenactments, which is what they're sometimes called by people. And I think that what we're doing today is really unpacking how real they actually are. A milling frolic is an intersection of different ways of experiencing music, depending on your role at the milling. And it's both a formal performance and an informal sharing. Formal because you buy a ticket and go in. Informal because of the things we've been describing. I'm just going to finish this. And when you're at the table, though, it oddly feels very private. So despite all the people and all of the noise, you're actually in your own little world when you're at the table, and that's a kind of miraculous thing too. And for some people, they just love this feeling of historical continuity. Even those who don't speak Gaelic say, we like to come because it's always been done in our community, or their parents or their grandparents spoke Gaelic. So outwardly, they look the same as they always did. This looks very similar to the 1944 and to accounts that we have from earlier days. But I think that millings in contemporary Cape Breton reflect not just this change in purpose, but also in meaning. And in order to understand this, we have to talk a little more about whether or not their performances or not, and whether or not they are real. Oh, sorry, I could stop for a minute. Jennifer, if you want to add something.
Yes, I actually have a question. So I really enjoyed these photos that you've provided, but I notice a lot of it is older people. And you mentioned how young people get involved through their family, but do young people within the community have the same enthusiasm about taking part in these sort of activities?
It is. I have a photo coming up with the younger people in it. A lot of these were taken because I wanted to capture that particular generation before they were gone. And I have to say that in the black and white photo, every single one of those men is dead now. So I'm very happy that I caught them and their rich knowledge of the tradition. But yes, you'll see because of these new initiatives and this new kind of Gaelic learning called, what's it called? Gaelic Ecovala or something. It's a way of learning that is not that's more context based, like, oh, let's do baking together, let's do gardening. So it's the way you would learn language, and that is really taking off. And a lot of people are finding their way into, who aren't like disposed to go to classes, are more into, like, who wants more classes when you're young too, right? So there are different ways, and there's a lot of mentorship. So yeah, it's definitely changing in that way. Okay, so I'm going to just finish this section because I'm building to my big point. So let's finish the section about milling frolics and then about the meaning, and then we can pause again and maybe have a little more of a chat about it. So I want to repeat this again. Although they look the same as always, I think that the millings in contemporary Cape Breton reflect a change not only in purpose but in meaning. And in order to understand this, we have to really ask ourselves if they are performances or not, and to what extent they are real. Now, some people argue that performances can't reflect a culture since they are consciously constructed, and by their nature they are artificial. I mean, certainly that performance photo looks quite artificial. However, in her book, The Archive and the Repertoire, which I highly recommend, Diana Taylor looks to performed repertoire rather than inscribed canon as a prime site of cultural knowledge. She writes, although a dance, a ritual, or a manifestation requires bracketing or framing that differentiates it from other social practices, this does not imply that performance is not real or true. On the contrary, the idea that performance distills a truer truth than life itself runs from Aristotle through Shakespeare and into the present. Truer truth than life itself. Taylor's comments are also in tune with anthropologist Victor Turner, who I fear has gone a little bit out of fashion, but he has some wonderful work on rituals. And he says that rituals, and I think then by analogy, performances, are storehouses of meaningful symbols that reveal a culture's underlying values. I mean, when you see them wetting the cloth and laying it on the table, and what you don't know is those are actually brothers who were doing that, McNeil brothers from around the Iona area. They are, to me, they're almost like I won't say priest, but to me, it almost looks like a religious ritual of the pouring of the water and the laying of the cloth. And there's so many things that I've written about before about why there are these what elements of ritual, or one could loosely think of them as ritualistic, are embedded in the milling frolic. Yeah, Marcia.
And just to kind of further that point, I think that typically in these events, oh, well, it's this person who does that. There tends to be people who are designated for special roles. Is that
That's
not
true.
true?
There is. There's also layers of inclusion, right? Just as there is in a ritual, there are the people in the core that sing the songs. Maybe they're like the priests or the celebrants on stage. There are the community members that are participating. And what you don't see here, which I find very interesting, and I think it's changing a bit, further to Jennifer's question from before, is young people used to all sit in the bushes outside and listen through the window, and they said they preferred hearing it distant and they didn't feel like it was their place, but they were comforted by, oh, we like doing this every year and listening from outside. So there's definitely different roles, and different people seem to end up doing them all the time. So I mean, the songs themselves are storehouses, as we saw just from 2 or 3 lines of a Chalia Gruamach, a gloomy forest song from earlier. We learned so much, right? He had moccasins. He must have known indigenous people. Winter came late that year. Lucky for him, it was December. No, there was a lot of snow, and there were things that he didn't know about, and it was dark. And I mean, we've learned a lot just from a few lines, right? So you not only do these songs impart a lot of knowledge, they also sometimes require knowledge in order to decode them. But I think what's worth considering is what the embodied performance that takes place at milling frolics shows about the Gaelic way of being, and the place of something in their lives that's called dúilchas. Now, dúilchas is a Gaelic word which can mean, like many Gaelic words, it can mean many things. It's most often used to refer to heritage or tradition, but it's also culture, it's inheritance, and I've heard it referred in the abstract to your character or what you're carrying. Dúilchas is tradition in the broadest sense, a collection of cultural elements, including storytelling, dance, instrumental music, and Gaelic song, Gaelic singing. And we haven't been talking about Caylís today, it's a whole other topic, but Caylís, Caylí means visit in Gaelic, and they really were a kind of house party in which all these elements of Gaelic culture would have been shared together. And I've heard so many great stories, especially from the Cameron family in Boysdale, who were, a set of siblings in their 80s as well. And they told me stories about their father's house parties. And a lot of the stories that the older people told was how they were listening again as children, and so how it was a site of enculturation as well, as maybe it was to a certain extent for some of the young people at the milling frolic. But Caylís were a place where you would observe and see all these elements together. And also the idea that, these were not framed as performances, any of these sharing of instrumental music or singing or dance. They had a little board they would bring out, and they made me dance on it, and it was a tiny little thing. So all these things were there, but it didn't feel like show off or performance. It was really a sharing. And I mean, even the invitation to sing in Gaelic is gav orin, which is give a song. You don't say to someone, sing a song. So that shifts the emphasis, I think, from the act of performance, so to speak, to an offering or a sharing. So we can see that even within the language, that the attitude towards singing is as a communal thing. And there's lots of other elements of the Gaelic language. Like, as you know, when you're learning a language, you learn a lot about the people who speak it, right? And in Gaelic, they have a very different idea of ownership to begin with. So if you want to say, my house is small, you say, ha antai acum beck, and that's antai acum, the house that's at me, just like it's, anlenia acum, the shirt that's at me. So we don't actually own material things. We only own things that are permanent, really, your body, your family. We do say mova, or my mother, but physical things, you don't own them. They're transient. So I think that language itself holds a lot of embedded information. So back to the, sorry. How I keep doing this. Sorry, I thought I had the pages right. Double-sided is terrible. Okay, back to singing. So when we play instruments, oh, sorry, I see that there's some questions in the chat. Maybe it's a good chance to have a break and see if they relate.
I had just let Jennifer know previously that we saw her hand, and then I just put into the chat this lovely phrase that you shared, give a song. No questions, but I'm just making a couple notes there.
Oh, okay, yeah. I have one more little thing to talk about to do with owning or sharing. This idea of being a very visceral thing. When we play, I've had instrumentalists, and I play instruments too, right? So yes, you use your body when you play an instrument, and you are at the mercy of your fingers or your embouchure or these different things, right? But with singing, as with dance, your body is your instrument, right? And in a way that's inescapable. That's in a way why anybody can do it, right? We all have the equipment to begin with. Lillis O'Leary is a scholar of Irish Gaelic song, and in his article about aesthetics and Irish Gaelic singing, he suggests that the body is a site on which ideas and metaphors are culturally inscribed. And he quotes Doris Adel. She's a scholar of Irish medieval literature, but as O'Leary points out, some of her comments are applicable to Gaelic singing in Ireland, and I think in Cape Breton too. He quotes her Adel, where she writes, "To come alive, the text needs the expressive apparatus of the performer. In the performance, the language becomes interwoven with his or her body language. The performing artist not only brings the text to life, but keeps it alive. A text becomes inscribed in his or her body." And this is what Diana Taylor was talking about too, right? That performance is the prime site of culture. Yes, we have literature, and we love that too. And may I say, a lot of my friends do have the book, and they would sit down and go through the poetry of a song in the book. But the song is really only living when it's alive. So I'm thinking that perhaps at a milling frolic and elsewhere too, in singing and embodying cultural elements, that Gaels are actually giving voice to their dúchas. So milling frolic then, what is it, and is it real? It's an inherently Gaelic kind of performance. It's an intersection of various ways of experiencing music, depending on your role or your experiences before. And it's embodied dúchas. So this is a good time to stop and think about it. Is it a performance or not? Or maybe some will argue we are always performing. So that's a pretty big topic, really, isn't it? But I'm reading the notes now. Chat, you know?
Really lovely turns of phrase, I would say, right? They're really nice ways of thinking about, like, bringing these different aspects together. So.
Okay, great. I'm glad it's resonating. It's a little more self-reflective in some ways than some other ways of looking at this material. Well, let's go on a little bit more then and talk about that sound, because I mentioned the kids hearing it come out through the window and what it's like to be in the middle of it. Really, people use the word soundscape an awful lot these days, and think that maybe not always applicably, but I want to talk about the milling as a soundscape. You could hear in the videos how noisy they are. As I said, the sound really increases when the people are there, and there's nothing louder than the Johnstown Milling Frolic, which are in some of those photos. It's really a small resonant building, and it's extremely loud. But it seems like millings have been this way for as long as anyone can remember, because, ooh, I did it again, God. As long as anyone can remember, right? And it doesn't seem like it means that anybody is not respecting the singing. So one of the solutions to this sound issue is reinforcement. So on the left, it's the infamous Johnstown. No, it's a wonderful milling. It's just very, very loud. And their solution is to have a volunteer with a handheld microphone who comes and puts it right in your face when you're singing. This is a deluxe volunteer here. That's Joe Peter McLean, who is no longer living. He was a Gaelic speaker and a fiddler and a really fun person to hang out with. And so he came along and he volunteered to do that. And then on the right, you see the solution they have at Christmas Island. Now, their main goal is to make an archival recording. They have a tape of every milling frolic they've done at the Fèis, which is their annual sort of grassroots cultural festival. Festival is kind of a grand word. It's like a series of gatherings. I think I like that better. Some are lessons, classes, some are performances, and this is the Milling Frolic 1 year. And you can see here there are some younger people, and the two at the front are actually the children of Jim Watson, Seamus Watson, who is died quite recently. Was it a year ago or so now, but was an amazing fond of knowledge on Gaelic singing, worked at the Highland Village. He wrote some articles, and both of his kids are Gaelic, or he has four, but those two are for sure fluent and very good singers. So you see some younger, and the young fellow at the end is he's just learning. He's like some community member's son that comes sometimes. But anyway, their solution, I digress to the youth there. Yeah, sorry, Marcia.
Yeah, no, I wanted to say too, the fellow with the beard.
Oh, that's Bradley.
Like Bradley, yeah. That looks Brad. He's been involved in a whole bunch of Center for Sound Communities things.
Oh, yeah.
Understanding that he's also like he went on a kind of an internship or training of some sort. He went to Scotland to learn some Gaelic songs.
Oh, good for him. Yeah. I haven't seen him for a year or so, so I'm out of touch. I know he was farming last time I saw him, but it was the last summer, I guess, like 2 summers ago. But we digress. So anyway, so this is the solution. Now, this is a two-sided coin, right? On the one hand, people say that the mics are distracting, especially the singers. Like in the left-hand scenario, Maxie is soldiering on admirably, but it's really, you're already a little nervous. It's your moment, and then this comes up here, and it doesn't feel very organic. It's true. It's a little bit better in the right-hand one, although I've been known to like try and sing towards it, because people are also irritated when they can't hear the solo singer. Like even as a singer at the table, if you can't hear the soloist, that's no good either, right? It's not as much fun. You don't know when to come in, and it's no good for the audience. So it's hard to say whether it's a help or a hindrance, but I don't think it's going away anytime, and I think overall it seems to be helpful. Talking about how the sound hasn't really changed in all this time, though, when the folklorist Sydney Robertson Cowell visited the North Shore in 1953 to record Gaelic singing, she attended several milling frolics for the purpose of recording them. But then she decided to reconvene the singers in an empty hall another day to re-record the material because of the noise. And if you read her field notes, which are quite entertaining, you can see the frustration she must have been feeling, which I can certainly relate to, because it's not easy to capture it with the racket. But they also reveal how things haven't really changed. She writes, "A length of cloth is pounded with singing as was common 20 years ago. The pounding is actually going on here and also on tape 116. There's a group of shifting membership over in the corner, talking, tea served elsewhere, children romping." Most of these songs recorded later on. She just kind of gave up on trying to capture that at the actual milling. So when we think about the voice in milling, I think we have to keep this whole sonic picture in mind. Amory Schaefer, the late Canadian composer and philosopher, has pointed out that with a landscape, we view it from one vantage point, right? You're standing here and looking out on the scene. But with the soundscape, you are automatically, like de facto, you are plunged into its center. It's all around you. And when you're in a noisy scene like this, you have no choice but to react in some way, whether you withdraw or interact with it. So such is definitely the case at a milling, whether or not you're at the table you're battered by layers of sound, and you're situated in the heart of it just because of the way a milling is arranged with these concentric circles. And the singer has to raise their voice above the sound of the beating of the blanket, the clinking of the glasses, the beer bottles, etc. Oops, let me go back. So, sorry about that. I think Marcia's, I was going to say this as a confession, but Marcia has mentioned how I wasn't always a ethnomusicologist. Well, who was? But I first came to Cape Breton as a singer. I just wanted to learn songs. I wasn't a researcher or a scholar in any way. And so even though I went on to do more research, my entry point was trying to figure out, what makes a good singer? What did they think was a good singer? And like, how could I try to be one too? And the singers that you see in these videos, and I'm not sure if Bradley is on the edge now because I know he has a band and everything, but I was going to say no one's a professional musician in any of the photos. They're wonderful singers. Song is important, even I'd go far as to say even almost central in their lives, because it's their social circle. It's something that we all, love to do. Especially in the case of the older tradition bearers, but certainly some of the young ones coming up, especially the ones that are working in jobs with Gaelic singing. They know a lot about the songs. They have a store of cultural information. They're Gaelic speakers. They're regarded as experts at what they do. But no one's a professional. Also, no one is the same. Like no two of these voices are really similar. You can try to find some commonalities, but you wouldn't say it's not like in classical singing where you're all trying to go for an ideal of a certain bel canto sort. It's not like that. So the intriguing thing is when you try to get help learning a song, so as with, I think probably the same with fiddling, the best way to learn is to go and visit somebody and you want help learning the song. What they'll actually do is place emphasis on the words, on the text, and maybe on their personal experience of the song, like who they've heard singing it before or how they learned the song, but not actually on the music. So it seems like the music, the meaning of the song is of prime importance, but also that songs in the present have to resonate with memory of past performances, which is something that I've written about extensively before, so I won't belabor it here. But the thing is, since they're emphasizing text so much, it seems amazing that when you're at a milling, they actually have to enact a complex musical aspect. They have to come to consensus on which songs to sing because everybody has different ones. Who's going to sing? How are they going to sing them? There's so many possibilities. There's different airs for each song sometimes, alternate melodies. What tempo are they going to take? What pitch are they going to put it at? There's so many choices, and they come from these different experiences, different repertoires, different styles. But amazingly, and as I said in a democratic way, they coalesce to form this one community of practice for that evening. And in former times, I understand that millings were much more local, like they were this part of the road. I think in that article they say if you were more than 7 miles down, 7 houses down, I think he says, you weren't invited to that milling. You would have a different milling. But now they come from all over, and I think even as far back as expat Cape Bretoners getting together in Boston in the 60s, I've heard stories about. They were also from all over. But what I'm trying to say is that each singer with these very different experiences somehow reaches a consensus while also negotiating their individual identity as a singer and their individual sound. So what I want to say is that although I'm talking a lot about sociability and I'm talking a lot about it's what the language gave birth to, which is absolutely true, millings have aesthetic priorities that I think are above and beyond the social ones. And so much evidence points to this, from the careful noting of discrepancies in different airs and texts. They'll say, like, you have it a little different than I do. The correction of learners, which that might have been when they say that to me, or it might be, sometimes it's just a comparison, sometimes it's a correction. The boisterous praise of a really good performance, and the intensity with which Gaelic singers recall memorable performances from the past. I think that's one of the most key things. If the music wasn't the most important thing or almost the most important thing, then you wouldn't have such vivid memories of the music, right? And the performances. So musical activities at the center of a milling, both physically, because the singers are in the middle. They're not at the front with everybody else. They're in the middle physically with everybody else listening around them. And also essentially. But this is the centrality of the music is realized through a juxtaposition of individual and communal expression. So that's also a way that it's different.
Stephanie?
Yes, that's a good place to pause.
Read for you the chat. Sheila Toom added that the idea here is about, in quotes, living history. She says the milling combines family rituals with community obligations. And in a way,
That's
you're
true
speaking
too.
about individuals and communities, but also families and communities more broadly. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so. Like I say, like a lot of people, they'll bring their children and the children run around, like even in Sidney Cowell's account, they might be running around, but they're hearing it. And you hear adults say, oh, I remember as a kid seeing them. So absolutely, there's the individual, there's the family, there's the community. I mean, again, there's different well, not levels, but you could expand the circle out, right, from your own experience. I see the time, so I want to get to the last section, which is talking about the sound of the singing. We've talked a lot about why and what people are singing, but I want to talk about how a little more. It hasn't been easy to get a straight answer from the singers, as I mentioned, because they want to talk about the words, which is fine and great, because it is somehow, well, what I'm going to say is when you take care of the words, when you do the words, the rest is taken care of. That's the thing. Our friend Taigh Berfalzet, he's a piper and an ethnologist, and he has written about the delightful metaphors that are used to describe sounds and playing in bagpiping when he's gone around talking to people about traditional bagpiping. And he notes that lots of the words they use to indicate quality or acceptability in musical performance are actually taken from discourse about food. So blas, it's a fat L, taste. That's, you hear that a lot, like that someone has a blas. I mean, you hear that even in more casual things, like it might even be in tourist brochures. So that one is big. They're not talking about taste like, oh, he has good taste. No, it's not a judgment thing. It's like taste, like, oh, you could taste it, right? Brie is essence. They talk about eating it. And there is the title of his article is like, Veeg to Jirika Ihe by Homa, like you could just eat it. You would just eat it. It was so good. So that's one way that he's found that people talk about it. But I think, you know, you're trying to have blas, but that's an intangible thing and you can't even really describe it. I mean, I thought at the beginning, I'm like, I'm going to write down all the things that I noticed. Well, the men are singing high. This is, you know, very like the outlawed cantometrics now. Like I'm just looking at the physical things I hear. The men are singing very high in the range. The women often don't. They often sing lower in a more relaxed way, unless they're singing along with the men, and then they're forced to go an octave above sometimes. People are using a chest voice, which for non-singers, the exaggerated chest voice is a Broadway belt, but it's a strong voice. It's not soft like a falsetto. In millings, again, we're talking about public singing. At home is obviously a different environment, a different soundscape. There's lots of tension. Some people use a little vibrato, but not that much. Alan has a fast vibrato. He was the one in my video, which is called like a goat trill sometimes. And as I said, there'd be a little bit of ornamentation or softer singing in private, but never the florid ornamentation that you hear in Sean Nos in Irish folk singing. I asked my friend Peter McLean, who you've seen in the photos, and I'll be talking about more in a minute, what are the qualities of a good singer? And he said, a good, clean, strong voice, good words. I would say any Gaelic singer should learn the song and the pronunciation and the air, but you should use your own natural instincts and your own way of singing. You can't duplicate anybody. Your natural talent, that's what counts. That's what'll come out. So he says a good singer is got a strong style, clear pronunciation is really first. He didn't mention timing, but obviously timing, which is what they use to talk about rhythm and stress and phrasing, that's taken care of when you have the words right, isn't it? Because if you got the words right and you can read them metrically, then the timing is taken care of. Good memory is important, and he's mentioned it to me before, but I mean, when we're talking 16 verses, or more, you need a good memory. And I think we should add this quote here, which is from John Shaw's book, Brian Oren, The Essence of the Song. He said that Lockie McClellan's uncle Neil, Lockie was a singer as well, used to say, "Took and Torin, understand the song." That was his advice to him. So when you go for a visit to learn a song, you can expect you will go over all the words, make sure that you understand them. And the musical aspect, you'll find that what they'll usually do is just say, "Oh, let's sing it together," and you'll sing it together. Or some people will play a recording for you and say, "Well, there's this one, this guy was really good at singing it." In one of the readings I gave you, Peter McLean teaches me a song while we're on a drive. And Peter died at 99 in 2013. And he was a singer and a culture bearer, lover of local history, dogs, whiskey. And he was a great character and a good friend from Christmas Island. And we used to spend these long afternoons together listening to tapes and singing along with them. So we were on this car, in this car ride. We were going to Mabu Ridge to visit another singer, Angus Rankin. And so Peter was a captive audience and kind of open to answering questions directly, more than more open than some, I suppose. So I asked him to help me learn this song. And he says, well, okay, so on a previous visit, we'd gone over the text and I'd made a recording of him singing it. So it wasn't an easy song text-wise. So it was good that we'd gone over that. But the melody also requires a little bit more singing, let's say, than some other songs do. So what he did was he said, well, why don't you sing the chorus and I'll sing the verses and we'll go from there. So I sang the chorus first. Achonyari gremi amawadak nakromi how amakaish furach let can be na hoich karin galnam butchawin rigawolor in restop and durachking. And he says, okay, that's pretty good. That's not bad. He says, but then he started to coach me and he says, open up more, use your voice, use the strength of your voice. And you have to give it a lift, he'd say. And he'd stop me, when I'd finish, he'd say, that's fine, but you'd have to, here you go. And then he would sing it for me. And so here's the recording that I made of him singing the song.
Well, now I get and go on a butch one. We can lower and stop and do the sky. The Hashin she is by in near the sakin, Pesheter me and the betrium. She took all course and came on my way. The you see wing, but I can just cut the wing.
Oops. Okay. So I that was him singing it, and we'd recently been listening to Johnny Beaton singing the song, and Peter had made this tape of Johnny Beaton singing in the 1960s, and he said he just loved the way he sang it. And here's the way it sounded when Johnny Beaton sang it. I'm going to start a little late so we don't waste time. So there's a few small differences in their renditions. There's a little bit of a timing difference. There's actually some word changes. There's some little things that are different in the melody. And so I said to Peter, should I imitate, your recording or Johnny's recording? And he said, no, you should never imitate anybody. You should use your own God-given talents. So it's what he's saying is be yourself, use your own talents, but at the same time he's establishing his, Johnny Beaton's rendition of the song as a reference point for both of us, and maybe setting it as something to be remembered as good, more of a style guide than a template. If you heard some other recordings of this song, maybe they'd be a little bit more different than people that knew each other well and that sang with each other all the time. But perhaps in a way, this is a kind of a lineage of this song. There was Johnny Beaton, and there was Peter, and there's me now, and maybe I'll get to pass it to somebody else, and we'll all have looked down this line of singing that we admired, or that in a style that's true. So we're talking about sound and voice today, but I cannot emphasize how important the words are. And I think we in the Reformation of the Christian church, or Baroque vocal music, maybe this idea that let the music serve the text. And I think that this is partly why there's less direct commentary in circles amongst singers about musical style than there is about the words that you're singing. And I did quote in that article I gave you when I spoke to Jeff McDonald about he's a Gaelic singer and teacher, and I asked him about Peter's singing style, and that's when he said Peter couldn't sing any way other than the way he does, because what he's got is these time-honored ways that this is the way a song should be done, and it's the best stuff that's stuck, the best style, and it's what the language gave birth to. And for Peter, I'm sure most time he sings, he's got this abandon. He doesn't have to try. He's like a conduit or whatever, and he lets the song come through him. So the answer to how to sing a song well, it's actually carried in the song itself. You can see there's a productive tension between the singer's role as a conduit to the song and its maker, and your role as an individual who's singing the song on this occasion. So it's an oral narrative culture, and the songs are living not in books or recordings, which are important to have, but while they're being sung. And this is why it's problematic to separate text and words, their meaning and allusions, and the stories they tell. They're so intrinsically bound up with the context and medium of the music. So for singers or those who listen from within the culture, the good performance resonates with their association and memories, but also with their understanding of the song. I'm reminding of something that a friend posted recently on Facebook. She teaches classical singing, and her singing mentor used to tell her, more vowel, less singing. I think what he meant was try to stop grafting art onto your performance, just stay in the flow. Maybe the Gaelic equivalent is more text, or maybe even more dulchis, less singing. Learn the song well, learn its social and cultural context, and then be a conduit. So I think we should try to sing a song now. I think we've got like 15 minutes left, 10 minutes left. Should we want to have any questions?
Yeah, does anyone have any questions before we begin our song practice? Okay, and might be helpful to open up our cameras so that we can kind of see each other and singing the song together. Yeah?
We open up our cameras, but not our mics, right? And I think, that old phrase, that cheesy phrase, dance like no one is watching. I think we can say sing like no one is listening, because we're not here right now, right? So you can feel what it's ironic to not be able to feel the lift that you get from being with the other singers. I remember singing that song that Peter taught me right after he died and being very emotional at the table. And when people join in at the chorus, it felt woof, like a physical lift. Amazing. So we're obviously not going to have that, but maybe you can just have the feeling of singing a Gaelic song. This one here, it's a song from a woman's point of view about her loved one who's died in a shipwreck. And it sees, she mentioned some place names around the Isle of Jura. There's this place, Scair Haliach, that's mentioned here, the rock of the old woman, and I fear that there was a lot of rock outcroppings that maybe his boat got hung on. But I'll show the text while we're singing so you can appreciate the beautiful imagery, tragic imagery. Smorenbe de hu clown like viga rapix and Yemen, like your curled pity that your curled tresses are torn by the seaweed. I mean, quite an image, right? Also, this one verse that I'm looking at shows also this beautiful, this repetitious thing that you get sometimes in Gaelic poetry. Gun kiiste, gun anished, without coffin, without shroud. Ach ganya vagrund, like there's nothing but the sand, that's his coffin to bury him. We don't have, if this were a full song workshop, we would go through every line and make sure that you understand all of the lines. But we're going to do a little bit of a fast track today. One of the reasons I picked this song is because it doesn't have, you don't need to learn any Gaelic to sing it. It has vocables, which I don't call them exactly nonsense, but they're non-lexical. They don't have a dictionary meaning, but you do, the way they're grouped together, we can identify a song. This particular song is sometimes referred to as a song for a young man who drowned, the drowning of a young man. But some people will refer to it as but you sometimes might confuse that with a similar kind of chorus. So anyway, I'm going to sing it for you, the chorus, and you can try repeating it after me. And then I think we'll let her rip. I've got the notes, the dots here while we're learning it, just for those of you who find that helpful. But it's an oral tradition. So, the really great psalm books, the old psalm books, there's no music in them. There's only words. And that's another topic too, about the insider nature, that you have to learn it from a person, right? Because there's no music even written in there. There are in the news.
Sheila, did you want to open up your microphone and just share your comment?
No.
She's saying, dang it, Stephanie, the Gaelic is beautiful, but can we join in muted in English?
Let's mute.
Is there an English version as well?
No, we don't need an English version because we're going to sing these vocables, and here's how they sound. If I you, if I you. Maybe I'll sing a line and you try and repeat it, see how that goes. You'll repeat it silently, so I'll sing it twice. If I you. If I you. The middle line is different. If I it really goes on, but we'll stop. If I and the last line is the same as the first one. If I you. If I you. The old choir thing doesn't work on Zoom because my hand disappears, so I'll give up on that. Just give it a try. If you were in person, it would be easier because it's easier to sing along. So I'd say turn up your headphones, sing like no one is listening. And you know what? It would be great. Would be maybe to beat on your desk. It's not really the fiddle is really a foot stomping musical kind of rendition. But here, why don't you try beating on your desk or your lap, or what they would also do, as you saw, was swing hands. If you have a buddy there, you can try that. So let's go on then. I put the chorus up in the corner for you, and you can all try and to be a bouncing ball, so where. And this is Peter McLean singing. He doesn't sing the whole thing, which is unusual for him, but there must have been a reason why. I'll mute myself too. Yay, sounded great, everyone. It's funny, usually they sing the chorus again at the end to indicate you're done. But I actually remember where I recorded that, and it wasn't a milling frolic. It was even less a performance than a milling frolic. So I'm done. That's I've left us with more questions and answers probably, but I'm open to discussing anything anybody has a question about or would like to contribute or suggest.
Thank you, Stephanie. Rita McKinnon is saying, such fun and a very interesting and thoughtful lecture. Thank you for all of the work that you put into it. Indeed, I echo that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I especially appreciated singing together at the end. I'm wondering if the students, they typically have a couple of questions. And so I'm wondering if the students might like to share their questions now, either in chat or open up your mic. Go ahead and open up your mic. Mary, you saw her for a bit on the video, is saying that was great fun. Thank you so much. And Hugh is saying very cool. Thank you so much. But are there any other questions, or particularly from, perhaps related to the readings or?
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about them much.
Yeah, Charlie's saying that was a lot of fun and a lively song. Thank you for sharing. And Jennifer and Stephanie are also sending thanks. Oh, you're the Stephanie. So yeah, I actually have a question. And then, and maybe this will give other people a minute to think before we hear some more of the students' questions. So I also have written about cultural practices in circles.
Oh,
When they are part of when I am part of that practice, there are practices that I have grown up in, for instance. I always felt that it felt very much like it was like just a big collective hug, right? Like in the sense that collectivity, that inclusivity is something that I felt.
mm-hmm.
But what I learned in doing research, and studying this as part of my PhD at the time, was that just as importantly as who it is that we are including in the circle, we need to think about who is outside the circle and why. And I think about that in very concrete terms, like the circle, who actually is involved at the milling tables,
Mm-hmm.
who actually is involved in the wider circle of the circle
Mm-hmm.
around that audience, who is involved in the circle around that outside the windows. but there are people who are just not included in the circles at all.
Right.
As well, about the ritual roles, right? There are people who tend to have and repeatedly have certain roles in rituals, and that is, if you are a person who's just watching or listening to a milling frolic, you might not know, for example, that those two guys that were brothers and involved as leaders in that context are brothers. Might look like, oh, it's just anybody, right? Everybody takes a turn. Well, in fact, no, they are brothers. It doesn't mean nothing that you are in the same family, right? Individual, family, right? So those circles delineate, right? So they can feel inclusive when you're part of them. They are also exclusive when you're not.
Absolutely. And I think that's something we fight against at the milling, is having people feel that they can't join in. I mean, I think anyone is welcome to come and sit at the table and sing along a chorus. And if you don't know, everyone will help you with the chorus. But everyone is not really welcome to just sing a solo, I mean, like, you are and you aren't. Like, I remember the first day I was asked to sing the verses. And that was like one of the moments of my life, like, I've arrived, I can sing this song. But so, yeah. And I mean, Peter used to, and that's him, by the way, in the blue shirt. Actually, I think he might even be singing the recording that I just played for you. That was the day, definitely. He used to actually drive over to Eskasoni and try and get those guys to come, because he knew a couple of fellows over there, and he said, we always used to mix, and I want them to feel like they can still come in. We should still be able to come to each other's things. And it shouldn't be such a cliquey thing. That I think that lots of traditions, like I think fiddle sessions are kind of the same. There was always outwardly you say, oh, anyone can come to the session. But if you came to the session and started wailing on your old time tunes, fiddle tunes, it would not go over well, right? So there's, I guess, like with all tradition, there's what is it? I actually didn't read a quote because I saw we were running out of time, but Lillis also writes about the rule-governed variability. That's it. Rule-governed variability, the idea that there's certain changes, like Johnny Beaton's making changes, but his changes are okay because he knows what he's doing. Or, there's certain, say, prepositions that are similar, and I've heard Peter swap them out, and I don't know if it's because he doesn't remember because he's singing, or that's the way he heard it, or whatever. But some people, there's layers of inclusion and layers of tolerance. So yeah, rule governed. It's in that article too, that aesthetics article. I think that might come from a quote from someone else that he recorded, but
yeah, and to be fair, I mean, we curate things all the time, right? Like, I didn't ask just anyone off the street to speak in the Human Voice series. We're asking certain people. I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, right?
You're gatekeeping, Marcia.
The question is, who do we ask and why? Who is given these rules and why, right? So as you were saying, Peter was saying, well, this is the model of a singer, and why? Why? Those are interesting questions.
But don't copy him. But remember it.
It's all very interesting, yeah.
And there's also, one of the singers once sang a song in English at the milling. So Sheila's my cousin, actually. She asked, are there any songs in English? So once someone sang a song in English, it was to the air of a song that's usually in Gaelic, and it's a funny song. And one of the other singers said, well, I don't know why he did that, and sang the song in English. However, what I noticed was people that were at the milling frolic really responded to the English song. They all came and started listening and laughing at the jokes because they understood it. And I thought, oh my God, that's how it used to be when the whole community understood the language. They were listening to the songs that way, and they were laughing and appreciating them in a different way that we still do. But when you're completely fluent, you're at a whole other level, right? So I thought that although it was a thing that someone didn't like about the ritual being changed, it really was illuminating. It shed light on a whole other aspect, really.
Hannah is saying that was a really beautiful lecture. She loves hearing the songs. Thank you. And Skylar too saying thank you. Great interactive lecture. He loved the idea of Gaelic song being a way to bring your individual voice together with honoring a specific traditional art form. So yeah, finding that the place of your voice and the ways in which it carries it as well. And Charlie saying from her understanding the Milk Frolic would take place in the fall as one last gathering before the winter set in. Is this something that's still done at this time for passing along the traditions? It's a question.
I have to say that the millings usually, like dances, they usually happen in summer now because that's when people are around. And that's when, you get lots of people home from away. And that's when there's the fete and little festivals and things. So I had heard that, and I think it might be in this article too, that they used to do a lot of millings in Cape Breton in the winter because everybody was around. Like the men weren't out fishing or farming, or the women weren't busy with all the tasks of the farm too. So there doesn't seem to be that set kind of time anymore, though. No.
Logan, could I ask you to open up your mic and could you say those words in Gaelic? Because I'd really love to hear you say that. I won't do it justice. Are you able to read that, Stephanie, out loud?
Tapalet Gemors, thank you very much.
Aha, my favorite lecture we've had, he said.
Oh, Tapalet Logan.
Do you have anything else that we didn't ask you about that we ought to have, or are there any other questions from the floor?
I've had the question. I gave a talk once at an SEM conference, and someone kept me outside for 45 minutes after my talk, arguing with me about why were there no women in my pictures. And it is very odd, and it's a whole other topic, that this generation were largely male singers. And there's lots of reasons, and I think it's a sociological paper for someone to write, but I think it was one man's wife said, well, I didn't have time to go singing, like to go doing this. I had all these children or all this work to do. I have to say, I don't know exactly why. And also, oddly enough, a lot of these men that were very into it, and I'm talking, some of these people are not in this picture, but they went away, and when they came back, while they were away, they realized what they missed. And one of the things they missed was, well, let's get milling frolics going again, because they'd kind of died off. And they happened to have married, several of them had married women from away. So I don't know, there's lots of factors. One video where there's only men, it's because Mary Jane Lamond was sitting on the other side of the table. And at the time we talked, and she said, oh, just leave me out of the video, because I was going to try and make a documentary. And she was trying to make one too. And we said, look, we won't be in each other's movies. So that's the reason. She happened to be sitting with women on the other side. So that's why that looks skewed, that one where I do where I've labeled what's going on at the Milling Frolic, because there was Frances McKechnie, you see her a little bit, who's now, in the Gaelic Council, or working for the Gaelic, what organization's called, the government one. Mary Jane, her, Laurie McKinnon, a bunch of people down, Betty from New Glasgow. Anyway, they were all down the other side. So there's lots of reasons why, but it does look, and here's another picture of mostly men. It wasn't always the way. There were lots of women. I knew good women singers too. And Peter's mother was his idol. Like that's who he thought was the best singer. So
Logan is also saying at one point in time, the Cape Breton Highlanders were the only regiment in the world that spoke primarily Gaelic. After Korea, the military mandated the regiment to only use Gaelic, but it didn't.
I don't think that'd work out. Imagine in a time of war, something was shouted at you that you don't understand.
Well, maybe they needed to be singing.
It's a nice
went bad at Vinny Ridge, because the Cape Breton Highlanders and Nova Scotia Highlanders were the ones that took Vinny Ridge, but the radio call after they took the hill was in Gaelic to a fella from Ontario, and it almost went bad because it wasn't English.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've given up on even like a friend and I meeting for coffee and giving the time, like time and place. We do this in English now, just in case, because I can get confused. Like quarter to, quarter after. Let's do the arrangements in English. So
in
I
a
wouldn't
way,
want Vimy Ridge in Gaelic.
so sorry, in a way, that's kind of again the negotiation between the smaller, the self, and the other, right? So like the one person, the Gaelics, which we want to celebrate, but in that instance, it was maybe not for the collective good, right? In the
Yeah.
Ridge instance,
Wow.
yeah. Wow, amazing.
I mean, I have a long video that I didn't have time to play of Peter talking about to him the tragedy of, and I think it's a great, if anyone's working on minority language erasure in general, indigenous or other languages, it's a great piece for that when he says, you know, how could your own country mandate the eradication of your culture and identity? Like how, you know, they stood by and they didn't just watch it happen, they made it happen. And he's almost crying in the video. It's very emotional. So, I mean, and he says that the songs, they couldn't keep going. The songs and the stories can't keep going without I mean, a song needs a mouth to sing and an ear to listen, as they say, right? And same for stories and such. They're rebuilding, but it's you know, that is probably another reason that Milling Frolics became emblematic in a way. As I say, the loss of the language has really cut down on the number of singers. They also say in this article, everyone in the room could sing, but they weren't all singers. Like everyone knew the choruses. But I mean, everyone knows probably the Beatles, or I don't know, people know a lot of pop song choruses now, where, you know, if you're at a party, it would have been their entertainment. So it would be known to everybody.
Yes.
Going off topic now.
No.
Well,
and I'm mindful of the time. Does anyone have any other questions, or should we thank Stephanie? Give her a hand, a final hand.